What makes someone truly Belizean? The legal answer is someone with at least one Belizean parent or someone born on Belizean soil. However, the question we're examining today is not so shallow that some rule in a book or a piece of paper saying that you are is enough to do it justice. I say this because it's difficult to put a face on Belize. Partially this is because of Jus Soli, the law that says anyone born in Belize is Belizean regardless of where your parents are from. But only partially, because most of the countries in the New World adheres to this principle while still maintaining a national character that is easier to place than Belize. The question of Belizean identity can be answered by looking at the history of the land and the people who call it home. Let's explore what makes us unique in the world, along with the challenges and opportunities that have and continue to present themselves to this day. My name is Phil Lane, and thank you for joining me on this journey of national introspection on today's episode of All About Belize. Belize might be a young nation, but we have an ancient past. One of the cradles of civilization is located just to our northwest in Mexico, where corn was first domesticated and cultivated at scale. From there, the Olmec, Maya, later Aztec, and many other indigenous people groups trace back their societal lineage. The Maya, at their peak, stretched from the tip of the Yucatan Peninsula throughout all of Belize and Guatemala into northwest Honduras. Now, place yourself in the shoes of a Mayan living during the Classic period, at the height of your civilization. Where would you decide to live? It's a very important question, as the survival of you and your lineage depends on your choice. You know your territory is in the tropics, and at this latitude, the sun supercharges plant growth everywhere, but intense rainfall washes away much of the land's nutrients. The most productive lands in this environment will be high up, because volcanic plateaus made up for the nutrient deficit. On top of that, temperatures become much more suitable for large-scale agriculture. We can see these factors play out in other tropical regions, like the biggest cities in Colombia and Ethiopia. Looking at the map, you see that Maya lowlands also had great capacity for large cities, like Tikal, Calakmul, and Caracol. This only happened because of smart engineering. They had the right mix of irrigation and use of fertile limestone soils to make up the difference in geographic advantage. This meant that during the decline of the classic Maya civilization, these large lowland population centers who relied on those engineers and the complex society at large were the first to go. When the highlands in Guatemala and Mexico have long surpassed their peak populations of the classical Maya era, the lowland regions of Guatemala's Petén, Mexico's lower Yucatan, and all of Belize has yet to reach those numbers of people. Outside Caracol and Cayo, much of what would become Belize was filled with smaller, decentralized communities like Nimlipunit or Cajalpech. So what factors would compel you to move into one of the smaller communities in land that would later become Belize? Knowing full well you'll be facing a harsher environment and more isolation? Perhaps you'd want to get away from the hustle and bustle of Tikal. More food, more people would mean more competition for resources, ironically making the harsher environment of Belize a safer bet for those looking to be left alone in peace. Mayans and other indigenous people continued to live in the area as the dominant group long after Maya civilization collapsed. That is until the arrival of the Spanish. Spain claimed land from Alaska to Chile, and their incursion created the mestizo people, Spanish and indigenous mix. They mostly focused efforts to take already established centers of power, along with the most productive land. Hernan Cortez took over Tenochtitlan, and Francisco Pizarro grabbed Cusco. The rest of the Spanish Empire had to compete with themselves for territory and influence in wars both external and civil. Where was Belize in all of this? We were claimed by the Spanish as well, so why did we become a British colony? Well, centers of power clustered in mountainous plateaus near minerals or river systems. While Belize has a few small rivers, nothing navigable enough to connect ships deep inland. No mountainous plateaus, or valuable minerals to speak of either. leaving Belize too far away from Spanish centers of power to exert meaningful influence. Again, geography played a role in the kinds of people Belize attracted. The forces conspiring against an indigenous person in Belize would be substantially less than what they would experience in much of Central America, making it an attractive destination for people fleeing oppression. This isolation also presented an opportunity for the most important group of colonists to our story, the British. The Baymen that colonized Belize didn't start out as colonists. They were a group of English sailors, pirates, and privateers who came to Belize mostly by chance. Coral reefs and shallow water all along the coast of Belize made an ideal spot for piracy. But these same waters that protected them shipwrecked many of them. Now stuck here, seeing an opportunity in weak Spanish control and abundant forestry, these sailors turned colonists began to export logwood and build permanent settlements. The Baymen didn't have to fight the Spanish at all. Spain granted the British permission to cut between the Sibun and Rio Hondo by official treaty. Those limits were often ignored for the same reasons that we talked about before, the same reason why the Baymen were able to establish any control in the first place. Belize is difficult to get to, and any attempt by the Spanish to dislodge them would mean marching an army through miles of dense, barely habited jungle, swamps, or attempt to navigate ships through a coral minefield. Too expensive to justify over land they barely had sovereignty over to begin with. Logwood, and later mahogany, made the Baymen a profit, but it was nothing close to the riches their sugar plantation owning counterparts in Jamaica or silver mine owners in South America were earning, but enough to purchase a relatively small number of slaves to make the work easier on them. This is where the group that really cemented Belizean identity came in, the Creoles. The story of Belizean Creoles is tied to the broader story of the African diaspora and the way slavery shaped the New World. Imagine you wake up on a boat heading west. You are bound for a life of slavery. The captain of the ship says you get to pick where you end up. So if you had to pick, where would you go? Enslaved people in America were threatened with being sold to the Caribbean, almost a death sentence given the mortality rate was so high. Not all places in the Caribbean were equally bad, but places like Jamaica and Barbados, where sugar cane dominated the environment, could see a person last less than 10 years after touching the island. Haiti, up until they revolted against the French, saw life expectancies even lower, closer to 5. South America would have been an upgrade to the Caribbean, not because the work was easier, but because enslaved people had more chances to buy their freedom or find work outside the mines and plantations. So based on your choices, there's a strong argument for America. They had the highest life expectancy a slave in the New World could expect, along with the only black population in the Americas that could sustain itself through births rather than the constant import of human beings. If you did get sent to the Caribbean, pray your destination didn't have sugar as its primary crop. There were parts of the region that stayed quiet longer, like Trinidad, Cuba, or Puerto Rico, but ultimately the Caribbean earned its reputation as a killing field. While your life wouldn't be good as a slave anywhere, Belize was one of the better places an enslaved person could end up. Of course, better is a relative term. Life under slavery was brutally oppressive everywhere, and Belize was no exception. We had multiple slave revolts in the years leading up to emancipation. But what made Belizean slavery different was the tight-knit nature of the Creole people. The practice was much smaller in scale here than was seen elsewhere, and the difference between the richest colonist and the poorest free person was smaller in Belize due to the wealth ceiling being lower. These conditions set the stage for a steady demographic takeover of the Creole in the country of Belize. During this transition of power, one of Belize's largest minority groups arrived on the scene, the Garifuna people. 2 slave ships, likely bound for Jamaica, ended up landing on St. Vincent prior to European colonization. The reasons for these shipwrecks are unknown. Maybe a revolt, a storm, or even a drunken error, but regardless why, the result was that a significant number of African people had to suddenly coexist with the native Carib and Arawak people of the island. For 100 years, the 2 people combined to create the Garifuna people also known as Black Caribs by the Europeans. A French attempt to colonize the island was somehow pushed back by the islanders despite a significant technological gap between them. The British, showing up for the second time in our story, successfully dislodged the Garifuna from St. Vincent. This took them on a harrowing journey throughout the Caribbean Sea. 4 out of 5 Garifuna people died from the moment the British got to St. Vincent until their arrival to the Central American coast. Only a couple hundred people actually made it to Belize and were allowed to settle south. Some of our final minority groups that I haven't mentioned yet are the Chinese and East Indian. Both came to the country primarily as indentured laborers after slavery had ended. The Mennonites, a religious group originating in the Netherlands, similar to the Amish in their chosen lifestyle, have become a major agricultural force within Belize. Lebanese and Syrians fleeing instability back home found opportunity in Belize, and now we finally get to look at our modern demographic trends, along with our most recent majority ethnic group, the Mestizo. In the West, there is an alt-right movement where one of their biggest stated insecurities is being replaced by up-and-coming minority and immigrant groups. Well, in Belize, it's already happened twice. First, the Maya and indigenous majority, leading to the Creole takeover, and today, the current demographic trends point to mestizos being the largest group and growing. The mestizo population is increasing due to high levels of immigration, mostly from Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, as well as a slow absorption from various indigenous peoples through intermarriage. The opportunities available abroad is the major force acting on the Belizean population. Mestizos living in nearby countries are on average living comparably to Belizeans. The difference, of course, is scale. The demographic weight of the mestizos mean that while only a handful of people are actually coming to Belize in terms of real numbers, its relative impact on our small population is significant. The absence of the Belizeans who decide to search for opportunities abroad is felt more acutely for the same reason. Belize is in the middle of rapid change, and while there is tension in the country, the transition continues to be relatively peaceful. So, what makes someone truly Belizean? We all come from diverse backgrounds. Many of our ancestors didn't set out to make Belize their home, they just did. Some for safety, others for opportunity. Maybe some just wanted to get away from it all. We don't always agree with each other or want the same things out of our nation's future. But in this melting pot we find ourselves in, tolerance proves to be our biggest virtue. The separation between the wealthiest and the poorest of our country is close enough to encourage unity rather than dehumanization. A Belizean is someone willing to adapt and even find comfort in situations that would make others run. Someone who values family traditions without being so stuck in their ways that they wouldn't open up to a stranger. We prefer to chill, party when it's time, but when we have to lock in and protect what really matters to all of us, we're capable of pulling off some incredible things. Remember to hit like and share this video. Leave a comment on what you think we should cover next. If you made it this far, you have my sincerest gratitude. Subscribe for more content. I've been your host, Philznane, and I'll see you in the next one. Lieta.